What's going on, everybody? So, in this video, I'm going to tackle a very controversial subject within society, within Christianity, and that topic is homosexuality. I'm going to go back and I'm going to bring up some interesting verses, and we're going to hash it out and we're going to discuss it. Now, before I get into all that interesting stuff, what I want to talk about briefly is just how this is another example, homosexuality being in the Old Testament, is another example about where Christians will cherry pick things. They do this often with other alleged sins that are in the Old Testament or that are in the Bible. And in this and with homosexuality, this is no different. So now what I mean by this is there are times when skeptics, or atheists, people, critical thinkers of the Bible will say to the Christian, hey, how come it is that, you guys don't follow the law? You don't follow the Old Testament Jewish law. And that being the Old Testament Jewish law would be all the laws of the books, in the Old Testament, right? Whatever laws there were, well, they don't follow all of them. They don't follow the dietary. But again, you start to see that they're cherry picking certain laws. But some of the laws that they do follow are like the ones against homosexuality. But what's interesting about this is that Jesus came. He says in the New Testament, Jesus himself is quoted to have said that he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Well, what exactly does that mean? No, it depends on which Christian or which scholar you talk to. But when you go back to the Christian, you challenge them, say, hey, why aren't you following this law or that law from the Old Testament? Why are you cherry picking? And they'll say, oh, well, Jesus came to set us free from the law and that we're no longer bound to the Old Testament law because when Jesus came, we're free of having to keep the law and all that. Now, of course, what they mean is, probably more specifically what they mean is that they're not bound to, have the pennants and have tassels on their cloaks or their whatever, the robe looking things that the Jewish Pharisees and Sadducees and all those Jewish people would wear. Christians assert, we don't have to follow the Jewish law. I don't believe Jews, maybe Jews for Jesus would believe what Christianity says, but many of the Orthodox Jews wouldn't, and I'm not a Jew, so I don't know if I'm misquoting the Jewish community. Please forgive me, but correct me in the comments below. Let me know, what do the Jews actually believe with regard to keeping the law? I believe they still believe that they are supposed to do all, I don't know if it's penance or whatever it is that they were required to do by law in the Old Testament, they need to continue to fulfill because the Messiah hasn't come yet. But Christians say that the Messiah has come. Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophesied Messiah. And so now all the Old Testament stuff they don't need to follow. But if that's the case, why do they then cherry pick certain laws like, things against homosexuality? Why do they still hold up that homosexuality is a sin, it's an abomination? There's even a passage, I believe it's, I want to say in the book of Leviticus, Deuteronomy, you don't quote me on this, where it speaks out and says that, this is the abomination of and it's talking about, basically homosexuality. But I don't believe that. I think that's out of context. Anyhow, so Jesus came allegedly to Christianity, saying, according to Christianity, says that Jesus came to set, Christians set them free from the law. So they no longer have to follow all those Old Testament laws, but yet they somehow can cherry pick which ones they still want to follow, which ones they want to speak out against. They're, the individuals that they want to villainize or demonize, they are at liberty, at free will to do that. What's also interesting is when you read in the New Testament, nowhere in the New Testament does Jesus ever speak out against homosexuality. Now, sometimes Christians will sidestep this and say, well, yeah, because Jesus doesn't need to reiterate what the Old Testament already said. Well, okay, that says you, Christian, but Jesus never specifically spoke out against homosexuality. Does that imply, can we imply or infer that means that, he thought it was okay? No, I think that might be a stretch, but the fact that it's not specifically addressed anything, and that there were times when Jesus did specifically give, I don't want to say laws or whatever, but he did state that, hey, this is detestable, or this isn't right, or this is pleasing to God. He doesn't reiterate any of those things in the Old Testament, and so Christians will say, well, that wasn't, his purpose. He didn't come here but if he's God speaking to mankind, and he spoke to mankind in the Old Testament days, certainly he could have rehashed some of that Old Testament fire and brimstone preaching stuff that we read from the prophets, if it's truly of God. And now we have God's representative, God in the flesh. Makes sense that he might speak out against homosexuality. Anyways, One other thing I want to do before I get into the meat and potatoes of this whole video discussion is an acknowledgement that there are some Christian churches out there that view maybe more like the Unitarian type churches, they're more liberal churches, maybe more progressive type Christian churches that believe that it's okay to be a believer, and they don't preach that homosexuality is a sin. Now, right off the bat, in case anyone doesn't know when they're watching this video, I don't believe that homosexuality is a sin, and I'm welcoming of my brothers and sisters in the gay and lesbian community. I have no problem with that. Though I come from Christianity, I like to believe that I'm liberated in my thinking now, that I see that it's not a choice that people make. It says they're born this way. I think it was Lady Gaga had a song, and I'm cool. I'm cool with it because I think that love is love, and I think we need to be more accepting of people. And now, oftentimes Christians will say, "Well, we hate the sin but love the sinner." Well, yeah, because the Old Testament says it's a sin, but the New Testament doesn't say it's a sin. Anyways, you'll find out there are some churches that do believe that it's okay to be gay, to be lesbian, to be part of the LGBTQ community, and that's okay, and they won't speak out against it. I have a problem with that in a sense on principle, because if Christians want to go back to the Old Testament and say it's a sin, because they want to quote these Bible verses that I'm going to read to you in just a moment, I think that's problematic. And not because I'm some homophobe zealot and I'm out. No, like I said, I have no issues with homosexuality. If that's your thing, I'm okay with that. But it's a problem if Christian churches are going to say, it's a problem, let me rephrase. It's a problem for the fundamentalist Christian churches. That's where the issues lie. The fundamentalist churches take a literal reading, and they're not so, I don't want to say watered down, but they're many of the fundamentalist churches out there, and many of your Pentecostal, many of your what's the word I'm looking for? Many of your charismatic churches, there are a lot. They believe that, yes, homosexuality is wrong, but some of the more liberal, like I was saying, progressive and maybe Unitarian type churches are okay. Maybe some of your not Methodist, but maybe Lutheran, Presbyterian, maybe you'll get it. There's something happening within Christian churches today where many of them fight with one another about, they're not on fire for the Lord. Their preaching is not from the gospel, is not from the Bible, and they need to preach more of the Bible, because the Bible really tends to alienate people within society. It tends to basically preach, I don't want to say hate, but anyhow, I don't want to blather on about it. I just wanted to acknowledge that there are Christian churches out there that believe it's okay to be gay and lesbian, and for them that's all right. And I think that's a problem if you're going to call yourself a Christian church and stand on Christian principles. And many of because the fundamentalists would agree with me, and because I come from that, so it makes sense that I kind of hold this view. But if you're going to say that the Old Testament speaks out against it, how can you preach and say it's not? It makes no difference to me. I don't want people to preach hate to gay and lesbians. I don't want that. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying, if the Old Testament says it's wrong, I don't understand how these, Universalists or Unitarian type churches are able to preach that and welcome. It's great that they do, but it's like, how can you still be part of Christianity? Now, of course, the fundamentalist churches would be the first one to quick and point the finger and say these churches are wrong for preaching that, because this is heresy. This is not doctrine. Many of the Catholic churches. I mean, I don't know what the Catholic churches' positions are on it. It's changed. If you look at it, you'll see. Like I said, across the mainline churches of America, at least, there's a watering down of the gospel preaching, and makes no difference to me. I got no dog in that fight, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge that there are some Christian churches out there, and that when I speak about Christianity, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, really, whether they be those very loose liberal churches, or whether they be the fire and brimstone fundamentalist churches that are strict adherent to taking every word in the Bible as literal gospel truth. I don't care either way, but I just wanted to compare and contrast the homosexuality's approach, how it's being approached with a different sects of Christianity. All right, so that's what I wanted to cover. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the interesting stuff. So what I'm going to start off doing is looking at some of the Old Testament verses, and then I'll show you what the New Testament says in a little more detail. The video is going to be a little bit long because I have to read through some of this stuff just to kind of share, and I'll comment and provide my commentary as we go. All right, so let's get into it. So first verse we have is from Genesis 19, 1 through 11, and it's a story basically about the city of Sodom and what happens, and it covers a story about homosexuality, and this is what it says. And I want you to compare this to another verse, another book that has a very similar story, and you tell me if they're not cut from the same cloth. So keep that in mind. All right, Genesis 19, verse 1 through 11. That evening the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Then he welcomed them and bowed with his face to the ground. My lords, apparently these were angels, he said, come to my house and wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up early in the morning and be on your way again. Oh no, they replied, we'll just spend the night out here in the city square. Now, if they knew this, the city, if you know anything about the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was basically, a very debaucherous, perverse, according to the Bible. This is, there's all kinds of sexual perversions. There was lots of perverted people there. There was lots of, gay and lesbians. Homosexuality was rampant, apparently, according to this story. But wouldn't the angels know that? So why would they? Apparently they felt like they were in no danger, but for some reason Lot felt the need to try to shelter and protect these people. I mean, did he know they were angels? Did he not know that? He calls them my lords, so who knows if he knew? It doesn't really matter. It's not relevant to the story. Anyways, the angels are like, no, we're cool with staying at slumbering, in the square. No problem there. But Lot insisted, so at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, a couple complete with fresh bread made without yeast, and they ate it. But before they retired for the night, all the men of Sodom, somehow they knew these angels were there, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so that we may have sex with them. Now, this is an entirely plausible story. I mean, in the sense that, maybe they weren't angels, but maybe there were some new visitors coming to the city of Sodom, and, the guys were feeling rapey and whatever. I don't know, but that's apparently how the story is portrayed up to this point. And there's an interesting thing I want to just share with you quick. There's a Dark Matter 2525. I'll give him a plug on YouTube. He has a video where he goes over this. I can't remember the title of it, but it covers this whole scene in a more comical way, and I think it's quite comical. Anyways, that kind of brings a lighter mood to this, and it's done in a way that's obviously calling BS on all of this and saying it's not true, but they're poking fun at the story anyways. So anyways, back to Lot. Lot steps outside to talk to these rapey individuals, and he shuts the door behind him and says, please, my brothers, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please, leave these men alone, for they are my guests and under my protection. Rather interesting. Now, Lot is apparently, according to the biblical story, the only righteous man in town, right? And he's ready to serve up his daughters to be gang raped by these rapey men. Not a very good principle that we're teaching here. I mean, why this is even what's the moral of that? That it was okay for them to rape? See, this is the kind of thinking you have to get your head around, that obviously there isn't much morality that we can derive from the Old Testament when you got stories like this that are obviously advocating for the raping of Lot's 2 daughters. I mean, that's pretty much what that story says, right? Most likely this is a fictitious story made up. I don't think that it's really happened, but many Christians take this as, as this is the truth. This story, why would it be in the Old Testament if it wasn't true? All right. So anyways, he gives up his daughters, but they're not interested in it. No, they said, stand back. And hold on. Sorry. They said, stand back. I was losing my battery. They said, stand back. This fellow came out to town as an outsider, and now he's acting like our judge. We'll treat you far worse than those other men. In other words, basically saying we're gonna do you up right. We're gonna do some, maybe some anal sex or something. I don't know. I don't know what they had in mind, but it must be some pretty bad stuff. Anyways, and then they lunged towards Lot to break down the door because they just were so rapey. They had to get in there and get at these men because they just couldn't withhold their lustful thoughts or desires, I guess. Apparently, that's what the story is trying to portray. Anyways, the 2 angels reached out and pulled Lot into the house and bolted the door. Then the angels apparently blinded the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside and went away. I was like, okay, sure. All right, so that's that story. Now let's quickly move to Judges 19, 6 through 24. See if this sounds quite similar to the story we just read. Completely different book, and it doesn't even allege to cover the same story. It's not talking about Lot, it's someone else. That evening, an old man came from his work in the fields. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, but he was living in Gibeah, I think, where the people were from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, not talking about the city of Lot. When he saw the travelers sitting in the town square, that's similar to the story, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. We have been in Bethlehem in Judea, the men replied. We were on our way to the remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, which is my home. I traveled to Bethlehem, and now I'm returning home. But no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have everything we need. We have straw and feed for our donkeys and plenty of bread and wine for ourselves. Apparently this old man says, you are welcome to stay with me, the old man says. I will give you everything you need that you might need, but whatever you do, don't spend the night in the town square. So he took them home with him and fed the donkeys, and they washed their feet, and they ate and drank together. While they were enjoying themselves, a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house. They began beating at the door and shouting at the old man, bring out the man who is staying with you so we may have sex with him. It says bring out the man. It doesn't say the men. See, now there's only a singular. See how the story is different, but it's a retelling of the same story? Anyways, so they said, bring him out so that we may have sex with him. The old man stepped out of the house to talk to them. No, my brothers, don't do such an evil, wicked thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. Here is my virgin daughter. See, not instead of daughters like in the Lot story. And this man's, let's see what it says, this man's concubine. So they were willing to offer up the man's concubine and his daughter. I will bring them out to you, and you can abuse them and do whatever you like, but don't do this. So obviously homosexuality is so perverse and so wrong, but gang raping a concubine and taking the virginity of this man's daughter is okay. That's the moral of the morality story that we get from reading this. Anyways, what I wanted you to do and see in these two different examples here, we have a story in Genesis about Lot. We have a story about Judges. They seem to be very similar, but yet the story in Judges doesn't say this is a story about Lot. You say, well, this could be about Lot and Sodom. Well, then why doesn't it just say that? In fact, there are quite some similar differences. You see, there's, you heard the story, so I'm not going to go back over it. Anyways, so this is what Christianity says. Leviticus, I mentioned this early on in the video. It's getting late. I want to press through. Leviticus 18:27. It says, do not practice homosexuality. Having sex with another man as a woman is a detestable sin. Okay, Leviticus 20:13 says, if a man practices homosexuality, having sex with another man as with a woman, both men have committed a detestable act, and they must be put to death, for they are guilty of capital punishment. All right, so capital offense, excuse me. So here we have the Old Testament that talks much about, at least in these couple verses here that I've read to you, about how bad homosexuality is. So if you're a Christian church out there saying that homosexuality is okay, I think you're wrong, because unless you're cherry picking what things you're going to follow, and which I think that's what happens within Christianity. So you've got some churches that are cherry picking, say, no, being gay and lesbian is okay, being homosexual, we welcome you. I think that's cool. I think that's great, because I think this is all bullshit anyways. So to make it mad at them, then you got those fundamentalist churches, like I was saying out there, that cherry pick and say, oh no, homosexual is wrong, and they get the pitchforks and like they're going after Frankenstein, and they cherry pick this one sin and place it above another. They say they don't, but oftentimes you see them holding these signs, which is very detestable. Say, God hates fags, and stuff like that. Completely wrong. I think that's not what we need in our society. But you've got people out there that gravitate to this sort of hatred and hate of our fellow mankind. Anyways, it goes on. There's a couple of the verses in 1 Kings and 2 King that just kind of talk about some of the stuff that's going on. It doesn't really specifically spell out, like it says, and there in 1 Kings 14:24, it says, and there were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before. And I guess this is referring to some type of reference to homosexuality. What I want to get to before we close in this video is, what does the New Testament talk about? So we've heard from the Old Testament now. Let's hear what the New Testament has to say. And we know that much of the New Testament was written about, I think all the New Testament verses that I'm going to quote are all written by Paul, or at least alleged to have been written by Paul. All right, this is from Romans 1:18 through 32. But God shows his anger for the heavens against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Yes, they know, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Many Christians would say that's what's happened to me. I think they're full of shit, but whatever. Claiming to be wise, they instead become utter fools. I've heard that before. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worship idols made to look like mere people, birds, and animals. Okay, and reptiles. This is all true. I believe this did happen. So it's not like this isn't factual. But what does that have to do with the homosexuality? Let's read on. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful thing their hearts desired. This is a verse that many Christians refer to and says is referencing homosexuality. Well, thus far, I mean, maybe you could say that the shameful things they view is homosexuality. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. Okay, this sort of sounds like maybe we have something to work off and say maybe the New Testament is talking about homosexuality. They traded the truth about God for a lie. They worshipped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. Amen. This is obviously what Paul says. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and indulged in sex with each other, and the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, they burned for the lust for one another. Men did shameful things with other men, and as a result of the sin, they suffered within themselves and the penalty they deserved. Okay, so we can see here, obviously, all this shows really is that people living when the time, Paul, when Romans was written, is that they viewed homosexuality as wrong, but it also shows you that homosexuality was occurring thousands and thousands of years ago. So many of the people that believe that homosexuality is natural, I'm with you, because I think if this was occurring, I don't think this occurred because of some sexual perversion, because I don't think homosexuals are perverse deviants. I don't believe that's what happens. I think this is just part of their hard wiring and who they are. So to suggest that this is a sin for something that's just natural and happens, that, and many Christians aren't okay with this. They aren't okay with the idea that, God could have created people this way. God doesn't make people gay. That's one of the things that Christianity and Christians will say. All right, so let's finish up here. There's a few more verses. Let's go on to 1 Corinthians and talk chapter 6, verse 9 through 11. This is also written by Paul. Don't you realize that those who do wrong will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't fool yourselves. Those who indulge in sexual sin and worship idols and commit adultery or are male prostitutes or practice homosexuality. Ooh, this specifically captures it right there. Or are thieves or greedy people or drunkards or abusive, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, they won't inherit. They're bad people. They won't inherit the kingdom of God, according to Paul. Some of you were once like them, but then you were cleansed and you were made holy. You were made right with God by the calling of the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Spirit of God, whatever, saved you. 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 10. Now we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding this. So now Paul is saying that the law is good. But I thought he said that basically Jesus came to not abolish the law, but he came to fulfill it. But Paul was speaking out saying that we shouldn't have to follow the law anymore. So now all of a sudden he's saying that the law is useful and that this is good and that we should follow the law. But what laws does he specifically mean? Probably only the ones that he cherry-picked, probably. Understanding this, the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and the disobedient. So, okay, only the law applies to those people that are disobedient and don't follow that. But the Christian who doesn't practice homosexuality, you don't have to follow the law, I guess. I don't know. I mean, trying to infer what I can from this. Anyways, from the ungodly sinner, for the unholy, profane, for those who strike their father and mothers, for murderers, sexual immoral, men who practice homosexuality, blah, 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 blah. All of this is going to say that basically that's why the law exists, is because those people are so perverse and they need to be brought into obedience, brought into correction by God himself. All right, last verse, Judge 7. And don't forget Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so this is a New Testament verse going back, referencing the Old Testament, and their neighboring towns, which were filled with immorality and every kind of sexual perversion. Those cities were destroyed by fire and as a severe, to serve as a warning of the eternal fire of God's judgment. Okay, so we see that you've got references in the New Testament that kind of corroborate the Old Testament that homosexuality is wrong. Is it a smoking gun? No, not necessarily. There was one other thing I wanted to mention, but I totally just brain dumped it, what it was, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and conclude. But I hope that from reading all of this, what you can see is that obviously, at least if you practice Judaism and you're a Jew, or if you're a Christian, homosexuality, according to the old sacred text, is wrong. So I'm not on a witch hunt against homosexuality. That's not my thing. I'm just trying to show you that this is what the Bible says about it, okay? And I think that they're wrong, but again, many Christians would say, well, no, I'm wrong because this is the word of God and that you just quoted and you just heard what the Almighty has said, and anyone that practices homosexuality deserves to be sent to the fiery pits of hell. I think many Christians would agree with that. I don't agree with that. Maybe you're like me, maybe you're a skeptic, maybe you're an atheist, maybe you're a critical thinker, and you can see that this kind of preaching is not good. That gay and lesbian people, I know people who are gay, I have friends that are, and they're good people. And whatever I may think is none of my, it doesn't, whatever they may do in their personal lives is none of my damn business. I don't care. It's always interesting, like I said, how Christians will elevate sins above other sins. And I just don't understand it, because it's like, it's none of your business what other people are doing. But again, as you can see, according to the scriptures, homosexuality is wrong. So according to God, at least what we can gather is that these people are detestable in the eyes of God. So I'm sure if you're gay or lesbian, you probably don't give a rat's ass. And I don't think you should, because most likely this was all written by man. And you see that homosexuality was obviously happening back in the day, and it's still happening now. It hasn't gone away. So whatever happened to the flood that was supposed to eradicate all sin from the world? Well, obviously God's extermination plan didn't work out too well. And they'll say, well, God did eliminate sin from the world, but then we chose to keep sinning. And that's why it still exists. I mean, all the things I'm saying here, many Christians would agree with. I think they're wrong, but I think they would agree with these things. Yes, that's what we do believe. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right to cherry pick certain verses. If you're going to follow one passage in there that talks about homosexuality, then you need to follow all the laws that are in the Old Testament. And of course, they won't agree with that. They want to pick and choose and cherry pick which verses they want to follow. So anyways, I just wanted to address this, because here's what I forgot, and I'm glad I remembered it. A while back, I talked about homosexuality, right, on this channel. And he said, I didn't know the scriptures, and I didn't know what it said. Well, I do know what the scriptures said, and I do think it's a propaganda of hate. I think that's what we're reading here. I think these are people from the Middle East that obviously saw that men and women were homosexuals, and they happened even thousands and thousands of years ago, even in 7,000 years ago with the Egyptians. Homosexuality has been here from the inception. How can that be? Oh, because of the burning loins and desires of sinful men and women, and that's why. No, I think it's a natural occurring thing, a phenomenon. We have animals in the animal kingdom that are gay, that have sex, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, it happens naturally. And when I was a Christian, one of the things I often believed was, well, being gay is wrong because it's not natural. You can't procreate, you can't reproduce, as if that's the only reason we exist, is to procreate, right? No, I think that if somebody wants to be gay, it's their business to be gay. And if God turns out to be true and we get to heaven and we're judged for these things, that's their business. It's none of your damn business if you're a Christian. So don't worry about it. But Christians will say, oh, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. Do you really now? Then why are you out on a witch hunt for homosexuality, and you prop it up, and pastors prop it up on their sermons, and they go after, with fire and brimstone and attack these individuals? I'm with the gay and lesbians. I think that they're just like everyone else. And I think that love is love. And I think we need to embrace these people. And so a religion that doesn't embrace all people is a religion of hate. And so that's how I view the Old Testament. That's how I view the propaganda in the New Testament. But going back to what Jesus said, Paul says all that stuff that I read in the New Testament. Jesus never once says anything. He talks about loving your neighbor. He never talks about how homosexuality is wrong. So don't you think that if he's the Son of God, he's God himself, that he would have taken this as an opportunity to preach to people and say, hey, homosexuality is wrong, but never once. He's silent on the whole issue and many other issues that you find in the Old Testament. And why would that be? Well, then Christians had to respond with, like I said earlier, well, that wasn't his purpose. He had many other things. He gave lots of parables. If it was such an important, hot burning issue in the Old Testament, it should have been a hot burning button, controversial topic in the New Testament, but it never mentioned. The only person that mentions it is Paul. And I don't have much faith in what Paul says, because I think he's just a man that wrote down, much like the other writers of the Old Testament books wrote, just sharing his opinion, just sharing his thought. He drew from the Old Testament. The Old Testament said that homosexuality is wrong. And so he even references that in the one verse I read to you there, where it throws back about Sodom and Gomorrah, how detestable it was. So I think that homosexuality has been around and always will be around. I don't think it's a choice. I don't think that these people are sinful, wicked individuals. I think these are people that need our love and acceptance. And we need to embrace that this is a natural occurring thing that happens in life, and that this is not something that we need to go out on a witch hunt and that we need to chase after gay and lesbians and transgender people. Just love and accept everyone for where they're at, and don't worry about it. Let God be the judge. If he really truly exists, God will judge these people, not you, Christian, okay? So it doesn't really matter what your Bible says. Most likely, it's not true. Probably God doesn't exist. I don't know that, but I'm willing to say that if I get to heaven and it turns out that I'm wrong, I would rather not join a clan or a group or a cult that propagates hate for other individuals, that doesn't, do this coexist thing. I'm all about that. I used to see the coexist bumper stickers when I was in Christianity, but we'd be so, but now I'm of the mind that, yeah, we do need to life is short. We don't have time for all this hate and all this, against other people that are different than us, because we want to demonize and villainize people that are different than us, that don't fit into the norm. I think that society as a whole has done a better job of becoming more accepting of homosexuality, and I think that's a good thing. And I think we're all better people because we embrace those kind of values instead of the trife that we read in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and the hate that's in there. It's not an inclusive book. It's a book that segregates, and segregation is a thing that we need to get away from. And I think as a whole, society, at least in America, we're getting better at being more embracing of it. I know this is still a debate whether someone's biologically male or female with the whole transgender thing. What if you're biologically male? That's a topic for another video. But anyhow, I'm at 30 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and close. If you've made it this far, I thank you for watching the video.